It's a pleasure to be with you again on our oral history program. This is Ray Mofield, and we're visiting today with Miss Eula Cox. And she's living at Walnut Court, the Benton Housing Project now, but I believe she tells me she was a native of the Gilbertsville area.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me in, and we start off by asking a question that a lot of ladies don't like, and that is, how old are you?
I'm 87 years old.
87, and were you born in Marshall County?
I was born near Gilbertsville, just a half a mile east of Gilbertsville.
Well, tell us your mother and father's names.
My father's name was James Daniel Culp. My mother's name was Florence Philbeck.
Florence Philbeck. Well, now, Culp and Philbeck, they're both good old Marshall County names. And
Thank you.
I've known a number of people named that. You weren't by any chance kin to Fred Philbeck?
He's my half-uncle, my mother's half-brother.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hit gold the first time around. And yeah. And the Culps, I don't know how many Culps I've known, but I remember one who was just ahead of me at Murray State, who played on the Sharp Green Devils state championship basketball team of 38.
That's none of my family.
His
It's
name
Sharp.
was Durward Culp.
No, and that's none of my family.
Mm-hmm. Not immediate family.
Well, his same name, but I never heard of him. I don't know him.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, do you know back as far as your grandparents on either side?
I know my grandfather Philbeck. I was a teenager when he died. John Harris Philbeck.
John Harris Philbeck, and that was your father's.
My mother's.
On your mother's
father.
side, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that takes us back a good many years. Now, did you go to school at
Gilbertsville?
Gilbertsville?
It was a two-room school at that time. It's considered the second best in the county. Of course, Benton was ahead of it. But it was what you'd call a graded school, 2 rooms. And we had excellent teachers. I don't blame them for not knowing very much.
Well, I'm sure our ancestors always had as good a schools as they could afford at the time, and we've gradually improved, but it surprises me in studying American history and Kentucky history at how much attention they paid to education. Now, there was, when you think about it, Lexington, Kentucky was settled in 1775 and named after the battle that they just fought in the Revolutionary War at Lexington, Massachusetts. And 5 years later, 1780, they chartered a Transylvania College. And
well, we had good teachers at Gilbertsville. It was next. It was counted next to Benton for teachers. You know.
You remember the names of any of the teachers?
Yes, Clifton Jett, Charlie Hust, Miss Dora Dyke, and
Well, you've come up with 3 in a big hurry there. That's probably better than anything I could do. You're still sharp at 87 there. It's real wonderful that you have such a memory. What did you like most about school?
Well, I liked English. Not that I know English so well, but I liked English. And, I got my history lesson because I had to. I didn't like that.
Yeah. Now you're telling me all kinds of history. If we just understood then what history really was.
I get my old history out here and read it now, and it's entertaining. I just enjoy it, and I wonder why I didn't like it better when I was going to school.
Was
But I
there
didn't.
was there a Cox that wrote a history of Marshall County? It seems to me that
Was it? It wasn't Blant, was it?
I can't.
What was his name?
I shouldn't have mentioned it because right offhand I don't. It seems to me though that there was a Marshall County history put out about 1933 by, I was thinking it said Freeman and Cox, but
I believe I've got that old history here somewhere, but I don't know who it said wrote it.
I thought maybe it was your husband.
Oh no, he wasn't a fool of that. He hadn't had to do farm work. He'd gone a hunting.
Well, you've told me something that he was a farmer. We'll get
Yeah.
back to that in a minute. Let's get you out of school and some other things you did, maybe games you played, or did you have any spelling bees?
Oh yes, spelling matches.
Mhm.
Yes.
They were
We'd
right
go to
fun.
other schools. Some of the older boys would take a wagon and team. We'd go to Calvert City and different places and spell. And we'd go to win too. We really studied for that.
Mm-hmm.
That was enjoyable.
Well, I've been interested in the past year about the county school board, and I commend them for it, and the superintendent.
Well, why don't
And
they
the-
teach spelling now?
Well, I'm not sure.
Had you noticed that some
I noticed-
high school students couldn't spell cat hardly? They don't spell. They don't teach spelling like they did when I went to school.
Miss Cox, I've noticed that a number of professors in the university can't spell very well.
Well, that may be so. That may, I
They
might
simply
be
do
right.
not teach spelling
They
in
don't
the same
teach
way they did when you were in school, or even when I was in school.
At least every other Friday afternoon, the last thing, we'd have a spelling match. And we'd study and prepare for that, draw it, two sides. And I flatter myself I can spell very well. I have to go to the dictionary now and then, but I studied spelling.
I was just about to say that I commend the school people for doing it, but I noticed they've appropriated a little money this year to have academic contests of various kinds. Now, I don't know what all of them will be, but they may not be spelling matches. They probably won't. Maybe there'll be. We used to talk about cipher matches too.
That's arithmetic.
Yeah, do arithmetic problems and see who could do them the most rapid.
Well, I know the multiplication table, but I wouldn't make a very high grade, I don't imagine, in arithmetic. Oh, I didn't like fractions. I studied fractions, but I got by with it. Studied enough of that to get by with.
All right, what about some of the games you played?
We played 1, 2, 3. It's like baseball.
All right.
Played with the boys.
Everybody had a place, and you were right in there with them.
The girls got down first. It's a two-story house. We got down the steps first, and of course we got the first bats. The first ones out and picked up the bats, got them.
Yeah.
Well, they did work to put us out, don't you forget that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I've always heard ladies were supposed to be first,
Well, I had two, so
and you.
But it wasn't fair to them to let us out every time. Really, it wasn't, because they could, if the teacher had been so mind, he could let them out part of the time. But naturally, we got the bats when we got out.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds good to me. I'm sure you enjoyed those days
I
and
enjoyed
think
my
about
school
them
days.
frequently.
I really did.
Well, when you got out of school, what happened then?
Got married.
You were
Young.
Were you married fairly young?
Yes, I was. I was 17.
17 years old. My mother
Uh-huh.
was about 16 when she
I was
married.
17. Just almost 18.
And Miss Cox, did you have any children?
I had two. I lost my son. I had a son and a daughter. And my daughter's Mrs. Edgar Wallace out here. I don't know whether you know the Wallaces or not. And my son died at 32. His uncle was over the fire department at Springfield, Illinois. I don't know what you call that office. I could if I'd think. And he went to work for him.
Fire marshal, maybe?
Yes. Let's see what the. Well, anyway, he was working for his uncle, and he got killed. They had a call, and you know when that whistle blows, everybody gets to the truck. Well, he was down a door or two drinking a cold drink when the siren blew. Well, he broke to go to the truck and ran over a fire hydrant, hurt his knee. Well, both of my children, when they got hurt, they always fainted. I don't know whether anybody else ever did or not, but they both did. Well, he went on and told the driver he was second driver, told the other driver to go on. He hung on the back, and going around the first corner, everything went black and he fell off, and the back of the truck ran over him, killed him.
Very tragic.
Took part of my life, I know that.
And it's such, you say, what, 32?
He's 32 years
That's
old.
very young, very young. Well, I'm sorry to hear that you had that tragedy in your life. What did you and your husband do most of your lives to make a living?
Farmed.
You farmed. And you were in the Gilbertsville area?
Yes,
most
that's
of the time.
right.
What did you grow mostly?
Well, corn, tobacco, and truck patches.
We always ask the ladies about if they enjoyed catching tobacco worms.
Well, I've caught them, but I didn't like it. My daughter, when she was little, she spotted me one evening when they got in from school. They always came to where I was, and there was a big old worm up in front of me, and she done it that way, and she said, "Mother, I wouldn't mind catching them if they didn't rise up and spit at me."
Yeah, and they did exactly
They
that.
did that.
Yeah. Now things are so much different. They spray for all of that. And they even have something, I think, that keeps the suckers from growing.
Supposed to have, but we didn't have that. We pulled them. And I
Yes.
pulled suckers. One time, my husband had a hard hand. He lived with us, helped make the crop. Well, a good friend up on the hill offered him more pay than Clifton was giving him, so he left. And that left us with 8 acres of tobacco, the two of us.
Mm.
I want you to know we got up early and worked late. But
Well, you had to with that. Was it dark-fired tobacco?
Yeah, dark
That
fired.
was the hardest kind to raise.
Dark-fired tobacco, as pretty tobacco as you ever saw. And he sold that during the Depression, I don't know what crop I'm talking about or not, for 7 cents a pound. Do you remember the Depression?
Oh, I certainly do.
I
Of course,
do
I
too.
wasn't real old at the time. I can recall 1933 very well. That
Eggs, 5 cents a dozen.
let's see, that year, my birthday's in July, so part of the year I was 12 years old, and part of the year I was 11. But I can remember it quite well, and as you say, eggs were very cheap, and I think my dad's tobacco that year, I know what the total price was. I know it brought $21.
Well, I think we got 15. No, my son had an acre, the prettiest tobacco you ever saw, and he got $15 out of that. But we got more than that out of ours. But,
I did. A lot of people back then would get real discouraged, and they'd rush off to Detroit or Chicago or someplace.
some did, but we didn't. We had plenty to eat because we raised it, had it at home. We raised our wheat and everything.
Yes.
And well, all we bought was sugar and coffee and baking powders and soda, you might
Mhm.
say.
There's salt, and that is it.
Yeah, so that was it.
Yeah, I can remember that we grew a little bit of everything.
We did. I liked to be out in the garden. We raised our food all except that.
Did you ever pick any blackberries?
Oh yes, I picked blackberries and canned them and made jam and jelly.
Did chiggers bother you?
Yes, but I got rid of them.
You could put a little kerosene on your
Yeah.
clothes or
Uh-huh.
something and
Yeah.
keep them off, as I remember.
I
But-
usually put on a jacket and tie the sleeves down tight, you know.
uh-huh.
Kept a lot of them off.
And I recall helping my mother a lot. She would, we'd pick berries and whatever we had, she'd can a lot of things in ball mason
I
jars.
can too.
We didn't have freezers then, but the corn and tomatoes and peas and beans, and she'd make kraut, and oh, we grew a few peanuts.
Kraut, ketchup, and canned pickles, and canned fruit, peaches and apples,
Yeah.
and plums, and whatever.
All right, tell us about any other facets of life where you remember any preachers in the area, or what the churches were like,
that
or were they
time?
different? Yeah, back in those days.
The Baptist Church at Gilbertsville's what I grew up in.
Uh-huh.
And
You remember any of the ministers?
yes, I reckon I can think of some. Hope I can.
Well, we don't want to put you on the spot there. I just thought you might.
I was trying to think of that old fellow that worked so hard to get rid of and finally did. But
What about did you ever go to a brush arbor meeting?
Oh, yes, I've been to them too.
I can recall those. And
They used to have them around Locust Grove, you know, they didn't have a church there.
uh-huh.
And we lived near Locust Grove a while. And they'd have their brush arbor meetings there.
Yeah.
After I married.
Were the roads pretty good when you were small, or were they?
Plenty dusty, but I remember when the streets of Gilbertsville was first graveled. And you don't know where the Fred Gregory house was, but that was about a mile out on the Birmingham Road. And the first gravel, they graveled the streets of Gilbertsville and graveled that highway, or road, back out to Mr. Fred Greger's place, which was about a mile. And everybody thought that gravel road was something wonderful. That was the first.
Oh, of course, gravel was made an all-weather road. You
Yeah.
could get over it in the winter, which was something you couldn't do on a mud road all the time. What about the businesses around there? You remember any of the stores? Or
Yes.
what all did they have? Was
It
there
was Charlie Jenkins, Rupert Provine had a big
a general store?
general store.
Mm-hmm.
And
I guess there was a blacksmith shop.
yes, a blacksmith shop, but I don't know whether I can remember his name or not. There was that store.
Somebody probably ran a mill.
Yes, that was, I hope I can think of his name.
Well, a grist mill probably, or
Yeah,
a flour
a
mill.
grist mill, no flour mill,
no
a
flour
grist mill, uh-huh,
And you'd take corn there, and
yes.
we didn't
Make
we
meal.
didn't have to spend money. The miller
I
kept
can't, I
part of the
think.
meal
I hadn't
for
thought
his.
of these things in so long,
toll.
I just can't think of that fellow that run the grist mill.
Now, Gilbertsville was on railroad, wasn't it?
Yeah, oh, yes.
And
And,
the Illinois Central Bridge crossed the river there.
Yes, in my young days, the old bridge was down in the extreme north end, and the depot was down there. And Miss Addie Chestnut took care of selling the tickets and had a grocery there. And she was an old, her husband started the business and he died and she took it over. But at that time, it was a very small village, just a few houses up and down each side of the railroad.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember when they announced they were going to build a big dam at Gilbertsville?
Oh, yes.
Did that cause quite a bit of excitement?
Well, yes, and a lot of people didn't like it because it took their property, you know, and they didn't want to sell. And
I can't blame them for
no, it didn't.
not wanting to give up their homes.
I remember when the dam was built, and I remember what kind of people came in to build it, too. There was there was open saloon down in the north end. They got that through and sold liquor and beer. Well, we lived in sight of that saloon, and I never will remember seeing them old, well, I don't know what nationality they were, but they're foreigners, and they'd get their liquor and come out there and get in there. There was a stack of ties down there. They'd get in and around them ties, and drink and fight.
Yeah.
And the mother'd get us all in the house, we children in the house, and lock the doors, and we stayed until that was all over.
Mm-hmm.
And that was funny for a child to have to do that.
Yes. When you and your husband started housekeeping, did you buy a place or rent a place, or did you inherit a piece of land?
He worked on his daddy's land. His daddy had 350 acres of land and made his children believe that they would never have to buy any. He had enough for all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we lived on his daddy's land until late years.
Now, do you remember what it cost to start housekeeping then?
Well,
You'd have to have a bedstead and
not as much as it does
table.
now. Table. We got in the wagon and went to Benton and bought a bedstead, a table. I had the dishes and some chairs. We didn't buy too much. Back then, you bought what you had to have.
Mm-hmm. I've heard my dad say that when he and Mother started housekeeping in 1919, if I remember correctly, they bought a Simmons bedstead. It was a metal bed, just the rails and the headboard and the footboard, and I guess there wasn't a mattress with it. I think they used a straw bed. Did you ever hear of straw bed?
Yes, we had straw beds and feather beds. My husband had a feather bed, and I did too.
They gave $5 for that bed.
I don't know what we paid for them bedsteads. We just had two, and we had feather beds and pillows of our own.
I know they bought
you didn't buy a lot of things that you didn't need back in them days.
Just gradually added to it. Well, did you keep a cow?
Oh, yes. We always had cows, our milk and our butter.
So that made a good addition
Chickens
to the
and
diet,
eggs.
and you had eggs.
Yes.
You could always kill the
My
old red
brother-in-law
rooster.
that lived in Springfield, Illinois, in fact, he is superintendent of the shoe factory in Springfield, Illinois. He came in one day, and I had a market basket sitting there full of eggs that I hadn't put in the crate to send off. And he said, well, what a pretty basket of eggs. And I said, yeah, you know what I'll get for them? And he said, no, I don't have any idea. I said, about 5 cents a dozen. He says, I'd break them over a post. I said, no, you wouldn't. I said, you'd need sugar and coffee and things that you couldn't raise, and you'd just take what you could get for them.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, I guess that is so.
Yeah. Well, that's a little bit different, of course. Today, though, it seems young couples want to start with a lot more.
Oh, yes, yes.
And they go in debt pretty
They do.
heavily, maybe.
But we weren't in debt. That's one thing we didn't do, was go in debt. We bought it so we could pay for it, and that's my policy yet, too. I don't go in debt for anything. If I owed anybody in this world a penny, I'd pay it before night if I knew it.
What kind of a cook stove did you have?
Well, we had a pretty nice little range. It wasn't, it didn't last a long time, but it was more or less, the sides was some kind of a tin, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It soon burnt out. We had
Yeah.
a nice little range stove.
I can remember when my mother and I was nearly grown, when they had what they called a box stove.
Oh, yes, I
And-
remember those.
And she bought then, or she and Dad, got a big range that had a white enamel front and a warming closet, they called it, up on top.
Well, mine had a warming closet.
A reservoir that you had hot
A
water.
reservoir. I had all of that, and I thought that was something grand.
Yeah. Do you remember when electricity came
Oh,
around?
yes, I sure do. Sure do.
What was the first thing you wanted when you got electricity?
Well, let me see. What did we buy first? A radio, I guess. I think it was, and one among the first. And I ended up with an electric stove, but I was a long time of getting that.
I think the very first thing Mother bought was an iron. Of course, that didn't cost much, and a refrigerator.
Well, we bought a refrigerator and an iron.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about county government back then? About let's say who was sheriff or judge or
Well,
Any
so
of-
long, that's not been way that back, but I remember Joe Price, being
Joe Price was judge, wasn't
judge,
he? Hmm.
And I should know a lot of the officers. I do remember him.
Well, tell us something about how people entertained themselves when. Did you ever go to somebody's house and sit till bedtime?
Yes, we've done that. And then in my young days, we had what we called socials. Just gather in and play little play little plays,
Mhm.
and that was entertainment back then, called socials.
How did you arrange for medical care back then? Were there physicians in Gilbertsville?
Well, yes, Dr. Carter was in Gilbertsville. He was our doctor in my growing up.
Mhm.
He married Reed Beatsby.
Did you have any home remedies you used much?
Oh, yes, everything you could think of. We doctored at home a lot. We had calomel and cough drops and cough syrup and,
My grandfather used to say, well, get some turpentine.
turpentine. We didn't let that turpentine bottle get empty. Stumped your toe while you put some turpentine on it.
Yeah. And one of the things that I recall was supposed to prevent all kinds of illnesses, I guess, and that was asafoetida.
Oh, yeah. And one time, I remember Mother putting some asafoetida around me. But I want you to know it didn't stay there very long.
You didn't like the smell.
I didn't like that. That's to keep off whooping cough or measles or
Mhm.
what. Now, wasn't that silly?
Well, I guess it was. I'm not sure what kind of powers it had.
Did you ever have to wear any?
I've worn it, but I don't know just exactly what was in it, or whether it had any. I don't guess it really had
Not
any
a thing
power.
in the world. It wasn't worth a thing in the world. It's just an old time belief.
I expect you're right about that, but I never analyzed it in a chemistry class or anything. What about customs in the neighborhood? Let's say when somebody died, was there a funeral director there then?
Well, yes. Fred Philbeck was the director a long time, I don't know whether you know him or not, but he's my mother's half brother.
Yes, I remember
The
that.
Philbeck Funeral Home,
Yes.
it still bears his name.
Uh-huh.
And way back when I was young, the funeral directors was at Calvert City. They didn't have any in Calvert City.
I've heard people say that they would come to your house, sort of, and fix the body.
Oh, they
and,
did back then.
And neighbors would sit up.
Sure,
for the
I remember
corpse all
that very
night.
well. That was, nobody wanted their children back then or their family taken out until they just had to be.
Mhm.
I've set up a many a night with some of my neighbors.
When the men had to dig the graves,
Yes.
they did that free for all the neighbors and so on.
Walter Travis, a friend of ours, they had twin babies. One of them died. I sat up there that night with them. Several times I've sat up.
And how long has your husband been dead?
17 years.
You've been a widow then quite
That's
a while.
right.
You have any grandchildren?
Yes, I have 5 great-grandchildren. I just have 3 grandchildren, but I have 5 great-grandchildren, and they're great, too.
Yes. Do they live near enough you see them very
Yes,
often?
they live, well, one of my granddaughters lives at Mayfield.
Well, that's nearby.
Uh-huh. She married Joe Richardson. His family lives here in Benton.
Well, it's just about time for us to say goodbye on the program. The half hour's gone very rapidly. Do you have anything special you'd like to get on before we sign
Well,
off?
I don't know of anything. I really don't.
Well, we certainly thank you. It's been a pleasure to visit in your home today, and we appreciate your inviting us to come in. This has been the Oral History broadcast, courtesy of WCBL, Shelby McCallum.